And especially the movement that we're in right now, the one that we're building here in Florida, all across the country. Like, this isn't new. There's a quote by Octavia Butler. It's like, our movement is different, but we're still looking towards their lessons. And, so when I think about regeneration of our movement, it's like, yeah, we are a continuation of the movement.
Growing, right? And we're always working on movement. I actually think that it's a long-term process and that it's a constant. Our movement is constantly regenerating.
It's a continuous thing, and it just goes through cycles. It's very much like nature. Like nature is what it is, and the generations that we're fighting for, that we're trying to build this new world for, like, they're going to have their own movement, and they're going to look to say in some ways, like, it's the narrative is definitely spreading, or like there's definitely more attention now than there ever has been, again, because of the conditions we're in, and it's like we're all being squeezed. And as we're in relationships with people, yeah, like I see that shift and that change coming. Something definitely is coming. When I read that, like, first thing that came to mind was, but it exposed, like, we knew the systems weren't working for us. Like, that's why we have the movement that we have. That's why we do the work we do. But society was already sick before we got into this global pandemic. And now it's just, it just seems like it's metastasized. There's so much greed that's, what's on the other side of so much loss. It was just like, and you're in the middle of it and you just feel so small. Like, what can I do? I think all of us were feeling that sense of powerlessness. We were all dealing with this global pandemic together, and it's like, what do we do? How do we get out of this? Or something, right? And there are things that are happening. I feel like, using the analogy of the pandemic, right? Like, we have strategies, we have vaccines. There are things that we can do to help minimize. Like, it's been a time of really just looking within and just kind of like taking ownership, and reconnecting with that sense of power. And I feel like that's why we're doing the work that we're doing, right? Is to help others recognize their power, right? To recognize our own power individually, but collectively, like, what can we do to combat, like, this disease? Because we are an ecosystem, right? And so if there's one part of the ecosystem that's sick, if we don't do something about it, it's eventually going to take over the whole organism.
I think sometimes that we go through a transformation. It's a much more difficult process to also try to heal society and transform our society when we have transformed ourselves. To know that, yeah, we're changing for the sake of our communities, but still facing so much oppression and repression and the trappings, the patriarchy, rape culture, for us to be changing for the sake of that. But I think that grace, while we're trying to regenerate, right, our society, because you can't be an abolitionist and be a judgmental person. So far into these systems of oppression, and we're born into it, that undoing a lot of the harm is such an important part of the process, just as much, right, as like the work. I think about this a lot, and my lack of clarity in what a new world. My radical imagination has a limit. That I'm reading things like the Combahee River Statement. I'm also recognizing more and more how limited even my view of.
I feel like the new world, it's like everyone's contributing, right? Like, we all live on this planet together. We all live in these communities together. We can, how are we kind of giving and receiving in a way that's like
where a queer, trans, Black woman isn't leaving here.
It's just safe to be, you know? You don't have to fear
being communities of generations of Black farmers in Apopka that are growing up with like lupus and because of the pollution to their soil, a world where that is
and like that's not to say that there's no tension or there's no conflict or anything that like that, because conflict can be generative, but you know, it's just a lot more balanced. I would miss comfort, I'm sure, you know, but also, is it really comfort? Is it really safety, right? If there is so much just vast disparities and oppression, you know, it's kind of like a false sense of comfort and safety, and a false sense of convenience, I think, too.
Right.
Because like this shit is crumbling and we feel it, but it's also like we're still trying to be the dog in the burning house. I think we are on the way to meaningful change. We are in the process of meaningful change and have been. And I think it's living out the values, right?
Celebration comes to mind, beauty, culture, acceptance, restorative justice.
And being in community and giving each other feedback, community with others who know your values and can hold you to it, and who have similar values.
Undoing and unlearning happening, right? The unlearnings of the patriarchy.
And I feel like I can ground that in, like, you know, in terms of what's happening right now, even with all this greed and pandemic, like I've never seen so many strikes happen across.
Accepting the nuances and differences, we're celebrating.
Setting the intention, planting the seed, and then trusting the process.